American sociologist Salvatore Babones slams anti-India propaganda. He has gone on to say that anti-Hindu Western intellectuals do not fear the rise of India. They resent it. He further went on to say, just as Western anti-Semitites are offended by the success of Israel, Western anti-Hinduists are offended by the success of India. Let me bring in my colleague Anand Narasimhan as well. Anand, first give us a backdrop of what is being said and what is a larger point that is being made.
Well, Professor Salvatore Babones is this American sociologist, and he had written an article where he had challenged the interpretation of data that is being put out by Western intellectual outputs or houses which are putting out these studies on democracies across the world, etc., like Economic Intelligence Unit, Freedom House, and some of the others. And he had challenged the way they were interpreting the data. He has actually gone ahead and done a deep dive, and when in the deep dive he found out that the people writing these papers or these one-page reviews on democracies, especially like India, were academics who were based in the West, but who had clear resentment. Now, that's what he has written, and this is the article which our viewers can peruse on First Post, which Professor Babones has written himself. Professor Salvatore Babones has written it. It's just published on First Post on the 7th, just about an hour ago, and it's on First Post, and the headline itself says very clearly that anti-Hindu Western intellectuals do not fear the rise of India. They resent it. So it comes from deep-rooted hate, misya or resentment, and that's what he has written. Just like they were not happy with the success of Israel, there are Western anti-Hinduists who are offended by the success of India, and he makes a case-by-case point. Now, this is happening at a time when Hindu groups across the world, be it Australia, be it the United Kingdom, be it America, everywhere are standing up to those who are deliberately targeting them. We have this instance which has happened in Canada. There were protests that happened with the BBC and in the United Kingdom after what happened in Leicester. There are protests that have to be undertaken in Atlanta in the US, in New Jersey, and of course in places like Melbourne and Sydney in the past in Australia. So what is it that he's saying? He's saying hate. Why does the West hate India? Hate is a very strong word, and to be fair, many Americans, Europeans, Australians love India. Even more of them know nothing about India. But whatever individual Westerners may think of India, the West is thoroughly anti-Indian, and that institutional hatred is getting stronger by the hour. It's very interesting that someone like Professor Babones has written this just around the time thinker, researcher and author, and also the head of a think tank in the US, author Rajiv Malhotra ji, has written Breaking India 2.0. And in Snakes in the Ganga, he talks about the entire academia, which is actually pushing this. And that's where this deep-rooted resentment for the rise of India is stemming from, and the narrative against India is coming from, and it's three-pronged. He writes in detail. But Professor Babones is now using data, and he's going through the deep dive of those who have written these reviews, and then he's challenging them and how you interpreted these numbers. Now, saying Indians will be very familiar with this form from their school textbooks, which are full of stories about anti-Indianism of the colonial era. To be more accurate, British as French and Portuguese colonization was specifically anti-Hindu, a tendency that ultimately led to the violence of partition. He's gone ahead to say for the first half of the century, modern India's independence, Western anti-Hinduism was relatively muted, but lately it has broken out in places like Leicester, Toronto and New Jersey. In all three places, the root cause is the same: an informal alliance between global Islamists and Western elites. Groups linked to Islamist extremism have convinced anti-Hindu Westerners to support their aggression toward Indians and India. Many Indians see the hand of Pakistan or even China behind this unholy alliance. This is to misunderstand the arrow of influence. Western elites are not being duped by Islamist militants into hating India. Western elites are using Islamist militants as shock troops for their own anti-Hinduism. We've seen this all play out before. Western elites have a long harbored a small but vocal anti-Semitic minority among their ranks. After the horrors of the Holocaust, over anti-Semitism became unacceptable in the West. This forced the anti-Semitic elites to change their rhetoric. Instead of spouting anti-Semitic slurs, they switched to anti-Zionist and anti-Israel language. They found ready political allies for their opposition to Israel in the Arab world and in Iran. And then he has more. He's written more, saying today on university campuses throughout the English-speaking world, you will find anti-Zionist, anti-Israel protests being organized by a strange alliance of Western secularists and militant Islamists. People who disagree vehemently on the progressive social issues like women's rights, gay marriage, work side by side to vilify Israel and prevent Israelis from speaking on campus. Together, they have organized boycott, divestment, and sanctions. BDS campaigns targeting Israel. And it's a similar format that he writes says is now being used against India, Hindus in particular, Indians and Hindus in particular, or Hindu groups in particular. So they have a new target, India, he says. As with Israel, the Islamists target India mainly for political reasons. They've been targeting Indian nationalism for more than a century, and they are not necessarily anti-Hindu. They have political goals and they are prepared to fight to achieve them. They recently banned Popular Front of India. The recently banned Popular Front of India is representative of this kind of anti-India militancy. It is not anti-Hindu per se. It is anti-Hinduism driven by its political goals, not by irrational personal prejudice. So the motives of Western anti-Hindu intellectuals are very different, but the respectability they provide is crucial for the success of anti-India movements. For example, the overtly political 2021 Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference was co-sponsored by dozens of university research institutes. He's gone ahead and also challenged the way they've interpreted data. A decade in statistical lingo is language is 2010 to 2019 or 2011 to 2020. But he then cites how some of these intellectuals have deliberately used the whole decade as 2010 to 2020 just so that they can create data points which will perhaps show India in poor light on certain statistic measures. And this is statistically infractuous or wrong, erroneous, because a decade makes 2010 to 2011 or 2019 or 2011 to 2020. It cannot be 2010 to 2020 because that is then 11 years. So simple things like these he's picked up just to say because the data points need to match a particular narrative. These people have been doing it and they do it deliberately because there is a resentment, a deep-rooted resentment, and this is an alliance, an unholy alliance that's been formed between Islamists and Western elite, and that's what is putting paid or somewhere pushing this anti-India narrative. He's written it in great detail. I think we should urge our viewers to read the whole interview, whole piece on First Post. He also spoke with us not so long ago, sometime just about 45 days ago. Professor Babones had a chat with us here at CNN News 18.